Had Bell been at the observatory that night, she would have observed its re-emergence. Bell maintained her watch, motivated by the signal's reappearance a few days later. On this occasion, she captured it during the brief recording. As the chart unfolded beneath the pen, it became evident that the signals constituted a series of pulses rather than a singular point source. Removing the chart from the recorder, Bell laid it on the floor and utilized a ruler to measure the intervals between the pen marks. The intriguing radio sources oscillated for 1.3 seconds. November 27, 1967. Bell reached out to Hewish, who was instructing at an undergraduate laboratory in Cambridge. His preliminary response was that the origin must be artificial, as no recognized natural phenomenon could generate a recurring radio signal. Nevertheless, Bell required clarification on why the source could not be a star. Nevertheless, Hewish was sufficiently intrigued to visit the observatory during the subsequent transit. Notwithstanding the peekaboo game the source had engaged in with Bell during the vexing weeks of October, it functioned as anticipated this time. Precisely at the designated moment, with Hewish and Bell observing closely, the pulses re-emerged. Hewish reviewed the records, observing the time of the source's appearance. The transit time varied from night to night, indicating it maintained sidereal time, the time of the stars. The signal originated from space rather than from Earth. They also eliminated alternative interpretations for the signal. Neither the Moon nor an artificial satellite in an unusual orbit was reflecting the signals. They dismissed the notion that the effects originated from a large, corrugated metal structure south of the telescope. Upon further analysis, the signal indicated that it was, irrespective of its other characteristics, located beyond the solar system, yet within the confines of the galaxy. Moreover, the source cannot be located on a planet orbiting a star because of the uniformly spaced pulses. If it were the case, the pulse period would vary as the planet revolved around the star, a phenomenon referred to as Doppler shift. The planet compresses its pulses as it approaches us on one side of its orbit, resulting in a shorter period, and expands its spacing as it recedes on the opposite side. No such variation was observed, only a continuous sequence of exceptionally well-timed pulses was noted. This was certainly an unusual astronomical event. We established that this new object was not associated with the IPS array by utilizing a different telescope and independent observers. We inquired of Paul Scott and R.A. Collins to corroborate their findings using an alternative telescope. As the transit time neared, Scott, Collins, Hewish, and Bell gathered around the recorder. Upon examining the pens, they observed, the pens remained stable. No wear manifested. Hewish, Bell, and Scott departed with disappointment. Yet Scott persisted in observing the pens. He abruptly exclaimed, "Here it is!" The others hurried back to the recorder where the signal was present. The scientists almost abandoned their efforts prematurely because of an error in calculating the source's transit time at the new location. Ultimately, Hewish and Bell confirmed the existence of the pulsating radio source. It was authentic, unlike any prior observations. The inquiries pertained to whom to notify and the method of notification. Making a novel discovery such as this is exhilarating and straightforward. Identify something novel, then hasten to the newspapers. Science functions distinctively. It necessitates a careful equilibrium between the imperative to secure prominence in scientific publications and the requirement for validation. The final factor provoked the initial controversy regarding Hewish and Bell's discovery. They uncovered a novel finding but needed to elucidate or substantiate it. The difficulty with this novel pulsing radio source resided in its inconsistencies. The swift pulses indicated that the source must be diminutive. Stars are substantial entities, and their periodic fluctuations generally transpire over prolonged durations, spanning from several days to months or years. Ultimately, there exists the limitation that no entity in the universe can exceed the speed of light. For instance, if the sun abruptly ceased emitting light for an unspecified reason, it would not extinguish instantaneously, but gradually diminish over approximately 1 second. The Sun's diameter is approximately 1.3 million kilometers, resulting in the last rays of light from its far side taking about 1 additional second to reach us compared to those from its near side. The impossibility of surpassing the speed of light suggests that an entity flickering on and off at such a rapid pace must be exceedingly diminutive. The remarkable precision of the period suggested it was substantial and systematic. As Bell later stated, it resembled a double-decker bus maneuvering on a sixpence. It was illogical. Moreover, astronomers discovered the capability to artificially generate such rapid, precise pulses, which even occurred at a frequency typical of signal generators. The integration of artificial and celestial sources presents a considerable scientific hazard. Scientists needed to be critical and meticulous to prevent the proclamation of a spurious discovery. The endeavor required considerable time and effort. However, it encompassed more than mere scientific rigor. We must briefly revisit a few decades to fully comprehend the Cambridge team's hesitance to disclose the discovery. In the 1940s and 1950s, a schism emerged between the radio astronomy teams at Cambridge and Sydney. While others have delineated the specifics of this regrettable circumstance, the pivotal event that impacted Cambridge's choice to withhold the pulsar discovery transpired in 1957. 2 years prior, Martin Ryle, in the presence of the Vice-Chancellor of Oxford University, elucidated the cosmological ramifications of the second Cambridge catalogue of radio sources, comprising approximately 1,700 radio sources. At that time, controversy persisted regarding the steady-state theory, proposed by Fred Hoyle, Herman Bondi, and Thomas Gold, in contrast to the Big Bang theory. The steady-state theory posits that the universe is eternal and unchanging. Conversely, the Big Bang theory posits that the universe originated from a singular event at a specific moment in the past and has been undergoing evolution ever since. Ryle demonstrated that the 2C revealed a significant escalation in radio galaxies with distance, refuting the steady-state theory, as greater distance implied further observing the past. If the steady-state theory were accurate, the number of radio galaxies observed in the past, and thus at greater distances, would be equivalent to that in the present, proximal universe. Concurrently, Joseph Pawsey's team in Australia was also enumerating radio galaxies. After surveying 1,030 objects, the Sydney group found no significant disparity between the observed number of galaxies and the predictions made by the steady-state model. Notwithstanding the eventual demise of the steady-state model, the Australian findings directly contradicted those put forth by the Cambridge group. The winning explanation for the origin of the universe was at stake. Rudolf Minkowski from Mount Wilson and Palomar Observatory journeyed to Sydney and Cambridge, dedicating weeks to analysing both data sets to resolve the issue. He authored an extensive memorandum asserting that the interpretation of the Cambridge data was fundamentally flawed and that the Australians were correct. In March 1957, the Australian group released a paper criticising the Cambridge survey. They were unequivocal, concluding with, "Instrumental effects significantly impacted the Cambridge survey, whereas the Sydney results were minimally affected." Consequently, most discrepancies arise from inaccuracies in the Cambridge catalogue. This analysis does not substantiate any cosmological conclusions. The Cambridge survey required greater resolution, creating ambiguity between individuals and weaker multiple sources. The Cambridge astronomers endeavoured to extract excessive information from the data, requiring revision. The subsequent 3C survey, although significantly more detailed, required alignment with the Australian findings. In opposition to Hoyle's theory, evidence persisted, indicating a notable surplus of weak, more remote sources. Nonetheless, their reputation had already sustained considerable harm. These distinguished scientists erred and faced the repercussions. They were not inclined to repeat the action. They needed to confirm the authenticity of these flickering, pulsing radio sources before announcing it to the world. A significant challenge in the discovery of pulsars was their seemingly artificial characteristics. All evidence indicated a celestial origin. However, the amalgamation of celestial and artificial components suggests the existence of extraterrestrial beings. Decades later, Carl Sagan encapsulated this scientific quandary. Extraordinary claims necessitate extraordinary evidence. Just before Christmas in 1967, Bell interjected during a meeting between Hewish and Ryle, deliberating on publicizing the discovery if Hewish's current Doppler shift measurements suggested a planetary source. Hewish stated, "At that juncture, extraterrestrial intelligence, ETI, remained a credible possibility in my perspective." Simultaneously, no evidence substantiated that the signals were of natural origin. In a somewhat humorous manner, Bell designated the source LGM-1, signifying Little Green Man 1. Who would be the first to ascertain this information if the signals originated from extraterrestrial intelligence? What is the procedure for making such an announcement? The discovery, in fact, incited Bell's anger. "I was attempting to obtain a PhD through a novel technique, and some trivial extraterrestrial beings selected my antenna and frequency for communication." Undeterred, Bell proceeded to the laboratory after dinner that evening to examine further the continuous chart recordings. She subsequently identified a scruff patch at RA11H33M. She reviewed the records and verified the signal. Despite departing the laboratory before closing for the evening, she verified that the source would be observable through the telescope later that night and resolved to investigate the second source. The temperature was frigid upon our arrival at the telescope in the early hours of the subsequent morning. The system underwent a substantial decline in gain at low temperatures. By manipulating switches, vocalizing commands, and exhaling, I achieved proper functionality for 5 minutes, specifically on the designated beam setting, Bell. This interference subsequently manifested as a sequence of pulses occurring 1.2 seconds apart. This was a crucial opportunity for Bell. It was exceedingly unlikely that two extraterrestrial groups transmitted to Earth concurrently and at comparable frequencies despite originating from different spatial locations. Bell placed the chart recordings of the second source on Hewish's desk and left for Christmas with a more optimistic disposition. Hewish persisted with the survey during Christmas, restocking paper and ink and organizing the paper chart recordings on Bell's desk for her examination. Hewish persisted in conducting daily timing measurements for the essential Doppler data. Hewish stated, "I refrained from speaking until I ruled out the extraterrestrial intelligence, ETI hypothesis. Upon Bell's return from vacation, she could not locate Hewish and proceeded to examine additional recordings. Having identified her objective, she swiftly located two additional sources, one at RA08H34m and another approximately 1 hour distant at RA09H50m. She verified all three new sources within several weeks. Bell meticulously examined the records from the IPS array, which now encompassed several kilometers of paper charts. Despite identifying several candidates, none were as favorable as the initial four sources. In late 1967, rumors about the Cambridge Group's remarkable discovery were prevalent within the astronomical community. Max Komisarov, a member of the group at Parkes, later recounted that an informant had informed him that the Cambridge Group was receiving signals from outer space. Initially taken aback, Komisarov calmed upon recognizing that all of astronomy was, in fact, receiving signals from outer space. According to Komisarov, when the announcement was made, it was revealed that they had not been intercepting Morse-coded communications from Alpha Centauri or the Andromeda Nebula, but their narrative was only marginally less extraordinary. However, the Cambridge radio astronomers chose to withhold the information. At a typical Friday lunch in Cambridge, attended by scientists from diverse related fields, the radio astronomers refrained from speaking when discussing their research. In February 1968, it was announced that Anthony Hewish would lead a seminar on discovering a novel type of pulsating radio source. On February 20, 1968, scientists commenced entering the Maxwell Theatre at the Cavendish Laboratory. Seated at the back, they assumed that every astronomer in Cambridge, including the contentious Fred Hoyle, was in attendance. They awaited Hewish's announcement while seated attentively on the wooden benches. Hewish disclosed everything. Nearly all, his team had identified a rapidly pulsating radio source lacking an immediate explanation. No one in the audience was aware of the sources. Notwithstanding the initial conjecture regarding extraterrestrial intelligence, it was evident that they had discovered a novel astrophysical phenomenon. The audience perceived this as the inception of a momentous development in astronomy. Hewish encapsulated the paper, noting that analogous objects have been identified in other sky regions. We deliberated on these objects, and Hewish proposed a pulsating white dwarf. Fred Hoyle proposed alternative theories. With his pronounced Yorkshire accent, he stated that he was unfamiliar with these objects, but believed they were supernova remnants rather than white dwarfs. He referred not to the expanding gas clouds, but to the remnants of Bardet and Zwicky's neutron star. Bell remarked, "Given the hydrodynamics and neutrino opacity computations he must have performed mentally, that is an extraordinary observation." In his autobiography, Astronomer by Chance, Bernard Lovell recounted his response to the news received following the Cambridge seminar. Hoyle joined Lovell while awaiting the commencement of the Science Research Council meeting in London, occupying the vacant seat to his left. Hoyle had recently returned from the United States, where the predominant subject in astronomy was quasars, particularly the utilization of large American telescopes to measure redshifts. Lovell inquired of Hoyle regarding any updates. "I am not well versed in quasars," he responded, "but during a colloquium in Cambridge last night, Tony Hewish declared the discovery of radio sources emitting pulsed signals with approximately 1-second intervals." Lovell expressed skepticism, immediately suggesting that the signals were likely a result of interference. Hoyle informed Lovell that the Cambridge team had been scrutinizing the sources for several months, and that the evidence suggesting an extraterrestrial origin of the pulses appeared compelling. Lovell returned to Jodrell the next day and was astonished to discover that, despite our close connections with Cambridge, this was the first time anyone had any prior knowledge of this discovery, pulsating radio source. It became apparent that Hewish and his team had effectively preserved a shroud of security and confidentiality regarding their work for several months, a notable achievement in an age of immediate communication among astronomers. A week later, Nature published a paper announcing the discovery. Following only 3 hours of observation, it eliminated the possibility of interference. These constituted a novel astrophysical phenomenon. The Cambridge group withheld the location of the sources for an additional 2 months, a tactic that exasperated astronomers globally who were eager to commence their own observations. Nevertheless, the disclosed location of the 4 sources was imminent. Francis Graham Smith, an astronomer at Jodrell during that period, would later succeed Martin Ryle as Astronomer Royal in 1982. Upon being informed by Lovell, I contacted Hewish and indicated that we could more efficiently pursue the 4 sources utilizing the 250-foot telescope, he recounted. He stated that the positional measurements of the other 3 had not yet been finalized. However, within a day he provided the positions, allowing us to commence observations. Alan Sandage at Palomar Observatory also obtained the position. Lovell disclosed the positions to Hoyle, who subsequently relayed the information to Margaret Burbidge, who was then affiliated with the University of California at San Diego. Shortly after that, observers and theorists globally began examining the objects. Jodrell Bank's advantage over Cambridge lay in its capability to observe the pulsar continuously, while it remained above the horizon, in contrast to the Cambridge telescope, which could only monitor the pulsar for a few minutes daily as it traversed the telescope's beam. Nature released a second paper on pulsars within a fortnight. Unexpectedly, Bell concluded her affiliation with pulsars at this juncture, delegating the observations to the subsequent cohort of research students. She completed her chart recording analysis, measured the diameters of various radio sources, and authored her doctoral thesis.